He had £40 left to his name. Rent was 3 days away. His daughter was sick. And he spent his last pound feeding a stranger he thought had nothing. He was wrong. But what she did next, nobody saw coming. This is a story about what kindness costs and what it quietly returns. Before we go any further, drop in the comments. What time is it where you are, and what city are you watching from? Subscribe to our channel to help kindness story go far. Now, let's begin. Every morning in London, the city wakes up running. Buses hiss. Suits rush. Coffee cups disappear into briefcases. Nobody looks up. Nobody slows down. That's just how it works in a city this size. You keep moving, or you get left behind. Callum knew that better than anyone. He was 33 years old, black, broad-shouldered, with tired eyes that still somehow managed to smile. He had a graphic design degree collecting dust on a shelf and a 7-year-old daughter named Zara who called him her superhero, not knowing that her superhero was quietly terrified every single day. Every morning, Callum strapped on his heavy insulated delivery bag, clicked on his helmet, and pushed his e-bike into the grey London drizzle. He wasn't just delivering food. He was delivering Zara's school shoes, her asthma inhaler, the electricity bill, the future he'd promised her mother before she passed. The app was his lifeline and his prison. Miss too many orders, your rating drops. Rating drops, you lose surge pricing. Lose surge pricing, and the numbers simply don't add up. Callum understood the algorithm better than he understood anything else in his life. He had no choice but to. Then one grey Tuesday afternoon, an order came through. A townhouse on Pembridge Lane, Kensington. Old neighborhood. Old money. But this particular address looked forgotten. The Georgian facade was beautiful once. You could still see it underneath the neglect. Moss crept up the iron gate. The curtains were permanently drawn. A thin film of dust sat on the front steps like the house itself had given up. Callum checked the delivery notes. Door is unlocked. Please bring inside. I am unable to walk. He stopped. Company policy was ironclad. Never enter a customer's home. Drivers had been deactivated for less. His phone was already buzzing with the next order request. He had exactly 4 minutes before the algorithm marked him late. He stood at that door for a long moment. Then he thought about his grandmother. How she used to sit by the window in her last years, not because she expected anything, just hoping someone might glance up and notice her there. Callum pushed the door open. Hello. In here, came a voice. Faint. Like something fragile trying not to break. He found her in the living room. A woman, late 40s, pale, her blonde hair resting weakly against the headrest of a sophisticated electric wheelchair. Her name was Elise. ALS had taken her muscles slowly, cruelly, the way the illness always does, leaving the mind perfectly sharp inside a body that no longer listened. She was facing the window. The blinds were closed. Callum set the soup on the side table. Can you open it? She asked quietly, without turning. My hands aren't cooperating today. He opened it. Steam curled upward, smelling of leek and potato. He placed the spoon carefully in her fingers. For 1 second she held it. Then a spasm fired through her arm. The spoon clattered to the floor. Broth splashed across the hardwood. Elise closed her eyes. One tear rolled slowly down her cheek. Just leave it, she whispered. Please. Just go. She wasn't asking for pity. She was simply starving, and too proud to let a stranger watch her struggle. Callum's phone buzzed again. New order. 4 minutes away. He looked at it. Then he put it face down on the table, picked the spoon up off the floor, wiped it clean, and pulled a chair to her side. My daughter Zara, he said casually, dipping the spoon into the bowl, refuses to eat soup unless I pretend the spoon is an aeroplane. Full sound effects. The whole performance. Elise opened her eyes slowly, surprised by his tone. He wasn't speaking to her like a patient. He wasn't speaking to her like a burden. He was just talking to her. I won't do the aeroplane thing for you, though, Callum added, his eyes warm. Unless you're really struggling. The ghost of a smile crossed her face. I think I can manage. Open up then, he said gently. And he fed her. Slowly. Without checking his phone once. He was late for his next 3 deliveries that afternoon. He lost his daily bonus. He went home 40 pounds lighter than he needed to be. But the next day, when the order came through for Pembridge Lane, Callum took it. He always took it. Some people slow down when life gets hard. Callum was the rare kind who slowed down for someone else. But kindness, as he was about to discover, always has a cost. And the bill was coming. There is a certain kind of friendship that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with fanfare or grand gestures. It builds slowly, quietly, in the small, unremarkable moments that most people overlook. A shared joke. A comfortable silence. The way someone remembers how you take your tea, without being told. That was Callum and Elise. Every day at 1 o'clock he arrived. Rain, wind, the grey London sky doing its worst. It didn't matter. He locked his bike to the iron gate, climbed the dusty steps, and pushed open the heavy door. The chair was always waiting beside her wheelchair. The curtains were always closed. But somehow, that dim, dusty room had become the warmest place in both their lives. Elise told him things she hadn't told anyone in years. She told him she used to be a sculptor. That before ALS quietly dismantled her body, her hands could take a block of cold marble and find the life hiding inside it. Her work had been displayed in galleries across Europe, Paris, Florence, Vienna. She told him this without bitterness, which Callum thought was one of the bravest things he'd ever witnessed. He told her about Zara. He showed her pictures on his cracked phone screen. Zara in her school uniform, Zara pulling a ridiculous face, Zara asleep with her arms wrapped around a stuffed elephant she'd named Gerald. She needs braces. Callum sighed one afternoon, spooning butternut soup carefully to Elise's lips. And she's decided she wants ballet lessons. I told her daddy's working on it. You'll find a way, Elise said. You always do. How do you know that? She looked at him steadily. Because you're here, aren't you? He asked her once, carefully, why her family never came. The house was grand even beneath its neglect. Nobody lived like this alone by choice. Elise's expression didn't collapse. It simply closed, like a door shutting quietly on a cold room. When you stop being convenient, she said after a long pause, some people stop seeing you. My illness took too long. My speech was too slow. Feeding me was too difficult. She said it plainly, without drama. They set up the bills on autopay. They come at Christmas. Sometimes. Their loss, Callum said simply. Elise looked at him. Yes, she said softly. It is. But the world outside that dusty room had no interest in quiet redemption stories. It was a wet Wednesday morning when everything broke. Zara had woken up wheezing, her asthma flaring in the damp autumn air. He'd pedaled frantically to the chemist on Bayswater Road, leaned his e-bike against the wall, and sprinted inside for her inhaler. He was gone 4 minutes, maybe 5. When he came back outside, the chain was cut. The bike was gone. He stood on that wet pavement for a long time, the inhaler in his hand, the rain beginning again, staring at the empty space where his entire livelihood had been. That bike wasn't just transport. He was still paying it off. Without it, he couldn't reach the delivery zones. Without the zones, he couldn't fulfill his scheduled hours. By that evening, the app had deactivated his account. Failure to meet scheduled commitments. 3 days later, Callum walked into Elise's living room. No delivery bag. No blue cap. His eyes were red and swollen, and he was trying very hard to hold himself together. He fed her anyway. But his hands were shaking so badly, he spilled the water glass across the side table. Callum, Elise said quietly. Tell me. And it all came out. The bike. The deactivation. The £1,100 rent due in 2 days. Zara's inhaler bill. The pawn shop that had offered him next to nothing for his grandfather's watch. He talked until his voice gave out, until he was just sitting in the old wooden chair staring at the floor. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and placed a receipt on the table. Elise looked at it. It was from the restaurant. Paid in full. His own money. His last money. I wanted to make sure you ate today, he said quietly. I just came to say goodbye properly. He picked up the spoon. His hands had stopped shaking now, replaced by something heavier, resignation. "One last meal," he said softly. "Let's make it a good one." He fed her slowly, the way he always did. When the bowl was empty, he cleaned her face, stood up, and leaned down to kiss her gently on the forehead. "Take care of yourself, Elise." He turned toward the door. His footsteps were heavy. Outside, London was still rushing, still running, still not looking up. "Callum." Her voice stopped him cold. It wasn't fragile anymore. It wasn't brittle or faint or apologetic. It was commanding. Certain. The voice of someone who had been quietly watching the world for a very long time and had finally decided to speak. "Open the curtains," she said. Callum turned around slowly. "Elise, the light bothers you. Open them." Her eyes were fierce, alive, burning with something he had never seen in them before. "Please." He crossed the room, found the heavy velvet cord, and pulled. What flooded into that room wasn't just light. It was the truth. And nothing, not the debt, not the fear, not everything Callum thought he understood about that house and that woman, would ever look the same again. The light came in like a confession. Callum stood at the window, blinking against the sudden brilliance, and for a moment he couldn't process what he was seeing. Because it wasn't a modest townhouse garden beyond that glass. It was London. All of it. The Thames glittered silver in the afternoon sun. The city skyline stretched wide and magnificent, towers, bridges, history and money stacked upon each other as far as the eye could see. And directly below, manicured private gardens rolled out in perfect symmetry, iron fountains, trimmed hedges, stone pathways that had clearly been tended that very morning by staff he had never once seen. Callum turned around slowly. The room he had been sitting in every day for months, the dusty books, the dim corners, the quiet neglect, it wasn't a tired house struggling to survive. It was the private upper residence of Harlow House, one of the most recognizable landmarks on the London skyline. A building that appeared in history books, on postcards, in the financial pages of every major newspaper in Europe. He looked at Elise. She was already looking at him. "My name," she said quietly, "is Elise Harlow." The silence that followed was enormous. Everyone in Britain knew that name. Harlow Industries. Steel. Infrastructure. The foundations quite literally beneath half the buildings in the city. A dynasty stretching back 4 generations. A fortune so vast it had stopped feeling like a number and started feeling like a fact of nature, like weather, like gravity. Callum's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The dust, he finally managed. The food deliveries. "I fired my staff," Elise said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were glistening. 6 months ago. Every nurse, every assistant, every private chef. She paused. "Not because I couldn't afford them. Because when they fed me, they looked at their watches. When they spoke to me, they chose simple words, as though my illness had taken my mind along with my hands." Her jaw tightened. I was a task to them. A difficult, time-consuming, inconvenient task. Callum stood very still. "So, I closed the curtains," she continued, "and I started ordering food through the app. Delivery after delivery, day after day." She looked at him with an expression he would never forget for the rest of his life. "I wasn't testing the service, Callum. I was testing people. I wanted to know if there was still someone out there who would simply stop." The words landed in his chest like stones dropping into still water. "How many drivers came before me?" he asked. "Enough," she said softly. "They knocked, they left the bag on the step, and they were gone before I could reach the door. A few opened it, saw the wheelchair, and found a reason to leave quickly." She tilted her head slightly. "You came inside. You picked up the spoon. You told me about aeroplanes." Callum exhaled slowly, running his hand across his face. "And today," Elise said, her voice thickening, "you came to say goodbye. You had nothing left, and you still spent your last pounds making sure I wasn't hungry." She nodded toward the antique side table beside her wheelchair. The one Callum had set hundreds of soup bowls on without ever opening its drawer. "Open it," she said. He crossed the room. His hands were trembling as he pulled the drawer open. Inside was an envelope. Thick, cream-colored, with a weight to it that felt significant even before he opened it. "Go on," Elise said gently. He lifted the flap, unfolded the contents.
It was a check.
His eyes found the number, and his brain simply refused it for a full 3 seconds. Stepping back, shaking his head. "Elise, I didn't come here for—" "I know," she said firmly. "That's precisely why it's yours. That isn't charity, Callum. That is back pay. For the care you gave me that money cannot actually replace. For the afternoons you stayed when the algorithm was punishing you for it. For every bonus you lost and every delivery you declined to make sure I didn't eat alone." Her voice broke slightly on the last word. She steadied herself. "For making me feel like a person again, when I had almost forgotten what that felt like." Callum pressed the back of his hand to his mouth. "But I'm not finished," Elise said. He looked up. "I need someone," she said, and there was something new in her voice now, not the commanding tone from moments ago, but something quieter and more honest beneath it. Not a nurse who watches the clock. Not an assistant updating a spreadsheet. "I need someone to drive me to the coast. I haven't heard the sea in 3 years. Someone to sit in the chair. Someone who feeds me without making me feel broken." She held his gaze. "The position pays £150,000 a year. Full benefits. A car. Living accommodation in the East Wing if you want it." A pause. "And I've already spoken to Whitmore Academy in Kensington. Zara's fees are covered. She starts in January. They have an excellent ballet program." Callum's legs gave way. He didn't sit down. He went to his knees, right there on the hardwood floor, in the flooding afternoon light, and he wept. Not politely, not quietly. He wept the way people do when they have been holding an impossible weight for so long that the sudden absence of it is almost violent. He cried for every early morning and every missed bonus, and every night he'd lain awake staring at the ceiling running numbers that never quite worked. He cried for Zara, for the shoes she needed and the ballet lessons she'd asked for with such careful, heartbreaking hope. He cried for the grandmother who used to sit by the window waiting for someone to notice her. And through his tears, he heard Elise's voice, soft and certain. "You didn't know who I was, Callum. You thought I had nothing. You thought I was invisible to the world." She waited until he looked up at her. "And you treated me like I was the most important person in the room." The city hummed quietly beyond the open curtains. London, still rushing, still running. But in that room, time had slowed to something human. Callum got to his feet. He wiped his face with his sleeve. He walked to the wheelchair and stood beside her, and very gently, he took her hand in both of his. "I'll take the job," he said. Elise smiled, not the ghost of a smile, not the fragile flicker he'd seen in those early weeks. A full, radiant, unstoppable smile.
"Good," she said.
"Because this yogurt isn't going to eat itself." Callum laughed. A real laugh, the kind that rises from somewhere deep and grateful and alive. He reached for the spoon. And outside, for the first time in 6 months, the curtains of Harlow House stayed open. Callum gave his last pound to feed a stranger. He didn't do it for a reward. He did it because somewhere inside him, he still believed that people deserved to be seen. And that belief, that quiet, costly, ordinary act of kindness, changed everything. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Kindness is never wasted. It always finds its way home. Callum didn't walk into that house looking for a miracle. He walked in because a woman was hungry. That's it. That's the whole reason. No camera was watching him. No one was keeping score. He was broke, behind on rent, and running out of time, and he still chose to stay.
That's not a small thing.
That's everything. We live in a world that rewards speed, that celebrates the ones who move fast, think fast, earn fast. But Callum was slow. Slow to leave. Slow to give up on someone. Slow enough to notice a woman that the rest of the world had decided wasn't worth stopping for. And that slowness? That beautiful, costly, inconvenient slowness? It saved them both. Here's the question I want to leave you with. If you had knocked on that door, if you were late, underpaid, exhausted, and the algorithm was already punishing you, would you have stayed? Most people want to believe they would. But kindness isn't what you do when it's easy. Kindness is what you do when it costs you something.
Callum proved that.
In a dusty room, with a plastic spoon, and 40 pounds he couldn't afford to spend. If this story touched something in you, share it. Not for the views, not for the algorithm, but because somewhere out there, someone needs to be reminded that goodness still exists, that people still stop, that kindness still wins. Like this video. Subscribe if you're staying. And leave me one word in the comments, just one word that describes how this story made you feel. I'll be reading every single one.